A black boy on his old bicycle crosses paths with a millionaire magnate stranded in the middle of the desert, out of gas and out of patience. What seemed like just a casual encounter turns into an unexpected story of generosity, transformation, and an unlikely connection. The next day, a black car stops in front of the boy's humble home, bringing with it a twist that will change their lives forever. Henry Carter was used to controlling everything around him. The magnate, owner of a fortune built with hard work and, according to his critics, a considerable dose of coldness, gripped the steering wheel of his sports car as if he could transfer his anger to the leather. The meeting in Phoenix had been exhausting, but he considered himself a winner. A multi-million-dollar deal closed, yet another proof that no one could compete with him. Now, he was speeding down the nearly deserted highways of Arizona, eager to reach his mansion in Scottsdale. The sound of the powerful engine filled the silence around him, while the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a spectacle that Henry didn't bother to notice. Suddenly, the unmistakable sputter of the engine cut through the classical music softly playing on the radio. The acceleration failed, the car lost power, and before he could reach the shoulder, the vehicle came to a complete stop. Henry slammed his hand on the steering wheel hard, the noise echoing in the luxurious interior. What else could go wrong today? He muttered through clenched teeth, his eyes scanning the dashboard for a solution that wasn't there. When he tried to start the car again, only the dry sound of the engine failing could be heard. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket with a sharp movement, but the screen only displayed the irritating icon of no signal. With no alternative, he got out of the car, slamming the door shut, the desert heat enveloping him immediately like a wave. Dressed in a dark suit made of fine fabric, clearly inappropriate for the occasion, Henry walked to the front of the vehicle and opened the hood. The sight of wires, gears, and metal parts irritated him even more. He understood nothing about mechanics. Sweat was already beginning to trickle down his forehead as he assessed the situation. It was then that, in the distance, he noticed something moving on the horizon. A small figure, but one that was approaching quickly. With the sun almost touching the ground, the silhouette of a boy riding an old bicycle emerged against the orange backdrop. He pedaled effortlessly, as if the heat and aridity were nothing to him. As he got closer, Henry realized the boy was perhaps 12 or 13 years old, his black skin glistening with sweat and a faded red cap on his head. "Hi, sir, are you okay? It looks like you're having trouble." The boy's voice was friendly, but Henry, still irritated, merely shot him a disdainful glance before turning his attention back to the engine. "I'm fine, kid. I don't need help," he replied in a dry, cutting tone. However, the boy didn't seem intimidated. He dismounted from the bicycle, propping it up with his foot, and approached with curiosity. "I can get some gas. I live nearby. Just wait a bit," he suggested, pointing down the road ahead. Henry huffed, the gesture laden with impatience. "Do what you want, but I'm not paying you anything for it," he retorted, crossing his arms. The boy smiled slightly, as if he were already used to responses like that. "All right, sir. I'll be right back," he said, getting back on the bicycle. He began to pedal energetically, disappearing into the horizon in a matter of seconds. Henry stood there, watching the empty road and wondering if he had made the right decision trusting a stranger, especially a kid. The sun finally set, and darkness began to spread across the desert. He felt a warm breeze pass by, bringing with it the distant sound of a coyote howling. Perhaps because of that, or due to the suffocating silence surrounding him, he finally began to feel something he rarely experienced: vulnerability. Would the boy return? As the heat of the desert night began to wane, Henry Carter remained leaning against the door of his car, his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. His thoughts raced as fast as he wished his car had before it broke down. Vulnerability was something he despised, both in others and in himself. He had been taught from an early age that showing weakness was giving others the power to bring you down, and that lesson had shaped his relentless personality. Where did that kid come from, he thought, squinting against the horizon. He definitely wants something. Nobody does anything for free. Distrust gnawed at his mind, turning the boy's altruistic gesture into something that, for him, could only have a hidden agenda. Henry's pride roared like a wounded lion, reminding him that he didn't need anyone, especially not some random stranger. "He wants to take advantage of me, obviously," he murmured to himself, his fingers drumming against the cold metal of the car. It was then that he heard the characteristic sound of tires on asphalt and the old bicycle appearing again on the horizon. The boy was pedaling hard, balancing a small gas canister. Henry straightened up, his face stern and his eyes narrowed, as if he wanted to intimidate Marcus from a distance. When the boy finally arrived, he dismounted the bicycle with agility and carefully set it down on the ground. "Here you go, sir," Marcus said, with a genuine and slightly shy smile, while holding the canister. Henry didn't respond immediately. He watched the boy, trying to understand the reason behind that gesture. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with suspicion. "Why are you doing this? What do you want in return?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the coldness of the question, but he answered calmly. "My grandma always says we should do good, even when no one is watching," he said, looking directly into Henry's eyes. There was something in the simplicity of the answer that left the man momentarily speechless, but he didn't show it. Rolling his eyes, he shook his head and muttered, "Nonsense." Without further words, Henry took the canister from the boy's hands and began to refuel the car. The sound of gasoline flowing into the tank was the only thing breaking the silence between the two. Marcus, for his part, stood patiently by, watching. He didn't seem to expect anything in return, and that bothered Henry in a way he couldn't explain. When he finished, Henry returned the canister with a quick gesture, avoiding any kind of thanks. As Marcus picked up the canister and prepared to leave, Henry opened his wallet with a swift motion. He pulled out a $50 bill and threw it on the ground, as if tossing away a worthless piece of paper. "Here," he said in a dry tone, "take this and go." Marcus looked at the bill on the ground for a moment before bending down to pick it up. The hesitant gesture and the look in the boy's eyes betrayed something Henry wasn't prepared to see: sadness. He didn't complain or defend himself, just put the money in his pocket without saying anything. Before getting back on the bicycle, Marcus simply said, in a low but firm voice, "I hope you have a good trip, sir." Henry didn't respond. He got into the car, slamming the door shut, and started the engine, which roared back to life. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw the boy pedaling back toward the horizon, his small body against the vastness of the desert. For a moment, something inside him almost made him call the boy back, but he suppressed the impulse. Henry Carter owed nothing to anyone. As he drove down the road, the $50 bill felt heavier than the gold he had accumulated. The next morning, the simple wooden house where Marcus lived with his grandmother, Evelyn, was in its usual calm rhythm. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the pure air of Flagstaff, and the sound of leaves being swept by Marcus broke the silence. The porch, still adorned with faded flower pots and a worn rocking chair, was the center of attention that morning. Evelyn, with her shovel in hand, was giving instructions to her grandson as he diligently swept the floor. "Do it well, Marcus. There's no point in starting and leaving it half done," she said, her voice as firm as ever. The day seemed ordinary until the soft rumble of a powerful engine broke the tranquility. They both looked up to see a shiny black car slowly parking in front of the rusty iron gate. The car, evidently expensive, seemed out of place in that simple neighborhood. Evelyn frowned, gripping the shovel more tightly, while Marcus stopped sweeping, watching the vehicle with curiosity. The driver, a uniformed man, got out first. He walked around the car and opened the back door with almost rehearsed precision. Then, to Marcus's surprise, Henry Carter stepped out of the car, wearing a pristine suit and sunglasses that concealed any trace of emotion. His rigid posture and assessing gaze made it clear that he was uncomfortable in the surroundings. It was as if he didn't know where to step, each move calculated but hesitant. Marcus took a few steps toward the gate, a mix of curiosity and distrust. Henry removed his sunglasses, revealing a look that seemed more lost than arrogant at that moment. "You're the boy from yesterday, aren't you?" he asked in a tone that, while direct, was not as cold as Marcus had expected. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, still uncertain about what was happening. He gripped the broom tightly, as if it were some kind of shield. Before Henry could continue, Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes sharp and her expression firm. "And what do you want with my grandson?" she asked, crossing her arms. Her tone was not hostile, but it made it clear that she had no patience for games or unnecessary formalities. She stared at Henry as if evaluating his intentions even before hearing his response. Henry looked away for a moment, as if the words were hard to come by. He glanced at the rusty gate, at the bicycle leaning against the porch, and finally at Evelyn, who seemed completely at ease in her firm stance. I wanted to talk to him. I can explain, but I think it would be better if we could talk calmly. Evelyn did not respond immediately. She studied Henry for a long moment, trying to decipher his intentions. If that's the case, you can talk from right there, she replied, still suspicious. Marcus stood beside her, silent but clearly curious. Henry sighed, a gesture that seemed to carry a weight he didn't know how to share. He looked at Marcus, then at Evelyn, but remained at the gate, motionless, as if the idea of taking another step was a challenge. I just need a few minutes. I don't want to be a bother, he said in a tone that, for the first time, sounded hesitant. Evelyn continued in silence, waiting for more explanations, but did not yield. Marcus watched the scene with attentive eyes, not fully understanding what that man so different from their world was doing there, standing in front of the house. The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees, as the three remained in that standoff, each trying to decipher the other. Evelyn's modest living room had a cozy atmosphere, but for Henry Carter, the environment was unsettling. He sat rigidly in the chair that Evelyn had offered, feeling out of place. His eyes scanned the walls filled with old photographs in simple frames. Some showed Marcus as a child, smiling next to Evelyn in moments that seemed full of joy. Other photos depicted people he assumed were relatives, a piece of family history that Henry couldn't remember having in his own life. The furniture was simple and visibly worn by time, but well cared for, reflecting a loving attention that was lacking in the expensive, impersonal things that filled his mansion. The smell of coffee and old wood mingled in the air, creating a stark contrast with the luxury offices and expensive restaurants where he was used to being. Henry took a deep breath, as if gathering courage, and finally broke the silence. Marcus, yesterday I was rude. In fact, I was horrible. He paused, his voice sounding more sincere than he intended. The truth is, I'm not used to people doing something without wanting anything in return. My whole life has been surrounded by people wanting something from me. Money favors business. So when you showed up yesterday and helped me without hesitation, I just didn't know how to handle it. Marcus, sitting next to Evelyn on the small sofa, looked down, unsure of how to respond. Evelyn, however, wasted no time. She crossed her arms and spoke firmly. We didn't raise Marcus to expect something in return for kindness. I always taught him that doing good is a reward in itself. Henry lifted his gaze to Evelyn, a bitter expression forming on his face. Clearly, you have values that I never had, he said, a touch of self-deprecation in his voice. He leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on his knees and intertwining his fingers. That's why I'm here. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And what exactly does that mean? She asked, her posture unwavering. Henry straightened up and took the leather folder he had brought with him. He placed it on the coffee table and, with deliberate gestures, opened it. From inside, he pulled out a white envelope and a stack of documents organized in a clipboard. He placed them on the table carefully, as if they carried something important. This, he began, pointing to the documents, is an education fund that I created in Marcus's name. I know you didn't ask for anything, but I need to do this. I need to do something to show my gratitude. It's the least I can do. He then moved his hand to the white envelope beside it. And this is for your family. It's not just money. It's something I hope will make a difference, that can give you a better, more stable life. His voice hesitated, and he looked at Marcus and Evelyn, clearly waiting for some reaction. For a moment, the room fell silent. Evelyn stared intently at Henry, her expressions a mix of surprise and caution. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed lost, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence, her voice serious but not hostile. Mr. Carter, we are not the kind of people who accept charity. We live with what we have and have always been happy that way. Henry shook his head, as if he had already expected this response. I understand, and this is not charity, he said, leaning forward again. This is recognition. You have something that I've spent my whole life trying to buy, but never could: integrity, values, and the ability to give without expecting anything in return. I want you to have more options. That's all. The choice of what to do is yours. Evelyn looked at the papers and the envelope, her mind working quickly. She knew the offer was sincere, but she also didn't want Marcus to grow up with the idea that everything could be solved with money. Finally, she looked at Henry, her gaze softened but still firm. I don't know what to say, but this is something we need to think about. Marcus, finally finding his voice, looked at Henry. Why are you doing this now? Why do you care so much? Henry was silent for a moment, as if the question had disarmed him. Because yesterday, you did something for me that no one else would. And maybe, just maybe, that made me realize that I have spent my whole life pursuing the wrong things. Evelyn and Marcus exchanged glances, and although the air was still charged with uncertainties, there was something in the room that hadn't been there before, a small spark of understanding. Sitting in the modest living room, Henry Carter seemed more human than he had ever been in his entire public life. He was no longer the untouchable magnate, the man accustomed to commanding boardrooms with a single glance. There in front of Evelyn and Marcus, he was just a man trying to understand something he had lost long ago. His breathing was heavy, as if the weight of years of silence was about to be broken. He ran his hand over his face, as if gathering the courage to speak. "I'm not good at this," he began, looking at the wooden floor. His voice sounded different, lacking the usual coldness and control. He slowly raised his gaze, first to Marcus and then to Evelyn. "The truth is that life has never been easy for me. I grew up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where every day was a battle to survive. My father worked in an auto factory, and my mother took on odd jobs as she could. We didn't have much, but they were honest, hardworking people." Henry paused, the silence filled with the sound of the wind blowing outside. He clenched his hands, the gesture revealing the tension he carried. "I was 10 years old when I lost them. My father died in an accident at the factory, and my mother, she couldn't bear it. 8 months later, she was gone too. After that, I was thrown into the foster care system, but no one wanted a traumatized boy. I went from home to home, learning early on that, in the end, I could only count on myself." Evelyn brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes shining with sadness. Marcus remained silent, attentive, absorbing every word as if he were hearing a story that felt distant yet deeply real. "That's how I learned to fight," Henry continued, his voice now lower, almost a whisper. "I built my empire from scratch. I worked 2-3 jobs at the same time while studying. When I finally got my first opportunity, I grabbed it with both hands. But along the way..." He stopped, looking at the table as if he saw something the others couldn't. "Along the way, I hardened. I lost trust in people, and I think I lost my soul too. I started to see everyone as enemies or tools. No one was trustworthy, and I didn't trust anyone." Henry raised his eyes to Marcus, and for the first time, there was something more than control or indifference in them. There was a glimmer, a vulnerability he had never let slip before. "But you, kid, you reminded me that there is still genuine kindness in this world. You didn't even know me, and yet you offered to help. You asked for nothing, expected nothing. You just did what you thought was right." Marcus felt a lump in his throat, Henry's words resonating deeply. He looked at Evelyn, as if seeking some confirmation that this was really happening. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but filled with emotion. "If my grandmother taught me anything, it's that helping is always the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Carter, not just for coming back, but for sharing this with us." Evelyn, who had maintained a firm posture throughout the conversation, blinked a few times to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She approached Henry, placing her hand lightly but meaningfully on his shoulder. "You are welcome here whenever you want," she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. "We may not have much, but we will always have space for someone willing to share something true." Henry nodded, his face carrying an expression of gratitude that he seemed unable to express in words. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but rather full of meaning. There, in that small room, Henry Carter, the man who had built an empire at the cost of his humanity, began to find something he didn't even know he was searching for. Several months had passed since that morning when Henry Carter appeared at Marcus and Evelyn's house. Life, once marked by daily challenges, had changed significantly for the small family. With the educational background created by Henry, Marcus was now attending one of the best schools in the area. The change was not only in the quality of education, but also in the confidence he developed in himself. In the school's impeccable uniform, with new books in hand, Marcus walked through the hallways with determination, eager to show the world what he could achieve. Evelyn, for her part, used the money offered by Henry to open a small grocery store in the neighborhood. The place quickly became a meeting point for the community, with Evelyn known for her generosity and kindness. She made a point of helping the neediest residents, offering credit to those going through tough times and distributing food whenever she could. "We have received so much," she would tell customers who praised her attitude, "and it is our duty to give back to the world the good we have received." As for Henry, his visits to Evelyn's house became regular. The man who once seemed incapable of opening his heart now crossed the threshold of the house with a shy smile, bringing carefully chosen gifts: books for Marcus, flowers for Evelyn, or even food for the grocery store. More than the gifts, he brought his presence. With each visit, he grew closer, beginning to understand that there, in that simple house, was something he had never found in his luxurious mansion: human warmth, genuine affection, and a sense of belonging. On one of those afternoons, Henry arrived at the house during a quiet moment. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Evelyn welcomed him with her usual smile and a glass of cold lemonade, while Marcus, now a more confident teenager, ran out to meet him. "I have something for you," Marcus said, holding an envelope. His voice carried the mix of excitement and nervousness typical of someone about to share something important. Henry, intrigued, took the envelope carefully. He opened the flap and pulled out a handwritten sheet of paper with Marcus's careful handwriting. He began to read silently. "Mr. Carter, thank you for believing in me. I never imagined that someone like you could care about someone like me, but you showed that people can change. You are proof of that. I want you to know that I will do my best to repay everything you have done for me and my grandmother. You are not just a friend. You are part of our family. With gratitude, Marcus." As he finished reading, Henry felt a tightness in his chest that he did not recognize as discomfort, but as something deeper, more human. He blinked a few times, trying to push away the tears that threatened to form, and looked at Marcus. "Thank you, kid," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "This means more than you can imagine." Evelyn, who had been watching the scene in silence, approached, placing a comforting hand on Henry's shoulder. "You deserve this, Henry, not just for what you have done for us, but for the man you are becoming." That late afternoon, the three of them sat together on the porch, as they had during so many other visits. Henry, however, seemed more relaxed, more at peace. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was slowly disappearing behind the mountains, coloring the sky with the same hues that marked the beginning of this journey in the Arizona desert. For a moment, Henry did not think about numbers, business, or meetings. He simply felt. He felt the gentle breeze touching his face, heard the soft laughter of Marcus and Evelyn beside him, and realized something he had long been unable to identify: happiness. Not the fleeting happiness of a professional victory, but something more lasting, more sincere. In that moment, he understood that success was not just in what he achieved, but in the connections he made, the moments he shared, and the impact he left on people's lives. For the first time in many years, Henry Carter was not just a magnate. He was part of a family. And as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Henry smiled. Not the bitter smile that marked his public image, but a calm smile, full of gratitude. He had found something that no amount of money could buy, a place where he truly belonged. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to continue watching.